Bonjour à toutes et tous. C'est un plaisir d'être ici avec vous, la Journée internationale des personnes handicapées, même si je ne suis pas avec vous. My name is AMacQ, and it really is an honor to be with you in a slightly unconventional way to talk about my favorite convention, the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, sometimes called the CRPD or simply the Convention. I bring you greetings from rainy Halifax on this day. So as most of you will know, the Convention is the international law that lays out the roles and responsibilities of countries in making sure people with disabilities realize their human rights. Globally, it's estimated there's about 1 billion people with disabilities living in the world. Around the world, people with disabilities make up the poorest of the poor. They are more likely to be excluded from school, to be unemployed, and to experience discrimination. The Convention has brought this exclusion and discrimination into the spotlight, and it requires countries to take action to make change and to secure the rights of people with disabilities. The Convention is a unique human rights treaty because it's not simply a listing of human rights. It outlines the conditions, the supports, the services that need to be in place to make human rights real. It firmly shifted us away from a medical model of disability and is anchored in a human rights and social model of disability. It understands disability as a set of barriers and is a tool to drive this shift away from a medical model. The Convention has a number of core monitoring and implementation mechanisms. It is monitored by a committee of experts called the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. It's an 18-member committee elected by member states. All countries who have ratified the Convention must appear before this committee. The Convention also places an obligation on governments to ensure the participation of persons with disabilities, their families, and their representative organizations in implementation and monitoring efforts. This week, in New York at the UN is hosting the Conference of States Parties, COSP. COSP is an annual conference to track the progress of implementing the Convention around the world. It's also where we hold elections to elect the members of this committee. And on Monday of this week, Sir Robert Martin of New Zealand, who is the first person with intellectual disability to sit on any UN committee, was recently elected to a second term. While COSP is typically held in June due to the pandemic, it has been postponed until now, and there's a limited in-person gathering. And for the most part, they've shifted side events and panels online. So here's a chance for you to get involved. If you haven't already, you can participate in side sessions and hear the global conversations that are going on through the UN website. It's a great chance to get caught up with the global discussions and to be part of what's happening around the world. We know about 182 countries have ratified the Convention. That's a pretty impressive number for a convention that only came into force in 2008. Canada ratified 10 years ago on March 11th of 2010. I've had the real privilege to be involved with the convention since its early days and its negotiations. For almost 17 years, I've watched the convention come to life. From early days negotiating in the UN basement to now, we really should pause and celebrate the accomplishments that have been made as a result of the convention. From national legislation to huge spike in awareness around the world, we have come a long way. Yes, we have a long way to go, and the convention gives us an essential tool to get there. There is no doubt the convention has been a landmark in securing the rights of persons with disabilities and spurring governments to take much needed action. But it's more than just a human rights treaty. The convention gives us a roadmap for inclusion, a lens for evaluating measures, and a mechanism for holding our governments accountable. As a roadmap, the convention provides a picture of what an inclusive life in the community, in our lives, in our country, and in our world could look like. The articles give governments and communities the directions they need to help build inclusive lives. And we know that rights are made real in our communities. Advancing meaningful and authentic inclusion at a community level advances human rights. The Convention gives legal and moral authority to our calls for inclusion. As a lens, the Convention is a valuable evaluation tool. It can be used as a critical analysis of policies and programs, of services and supports, how funding is being used, how budgets are allocated. It can help us see how these things are stacking up from a rights-based perspective on the rights secured in the Convention. And in addition to the text of the Convention, there are other documents, such as general comments, which are comments written by the Committee of Experts. They're on particular issues or particular articles. And to date, the CRPD committee has done 7 general comments. They're on issues like legal capacity, inclusive education, living in the community, and participating in implementing and monitoring the Convention. We also have thematic reports by the Special Rapporteur. And taken together, these provide us with authoritative statements on what the Convention means and what we need to do to make the Convention real. As an accountability mechanism, the Convention requires that countries who ratify must report to the CRPD committee. That committee encourages submissions from the disability community. Those submissions help the committee get an understanding of what's happening on the ground for people with disabilities and their families. The committee uses that information to ask questions of countries when they appear before the committee, and they use it to inform their reports. The committee reviews country reports and write what we call concluding observations, basically recommendations that countries need to take action on to improve what they are doing for people with disabilities. The committee also develops lists of issues, which are essentially a series of questions that the reporting government is asked to provide information on. These are really valuable tools for us to engage with our governments and getting the committee to ask our governments particular questions to show where our government needs to take action or to get information about the action that they are taking. Canada has had 1 appearance before the committee and is currently preparing for its 2nd and 3rd combined report. They were due to report in 2020, but due to the pandemic, that has been delayed. Canada's national disability community works closely and collaboratively to ensure that our voices are brought to that table. Most recently, the submission of Canadian civil society organizations on the list of issues prior to reporting was developed in collaboration with the national disability community and submitted in July of 2019. That report, as well as the list of issues prior to reporting, is available on the committee's website. In addition to the committee, we have a UN Special Rapporteur on the rights of persons with disabilities. The Special Rapporteur can act on complaints received, conduct country visits, reports to the Human Rights Council and the General Assembly, and drafts thematic reports. The current Special Rapporteur is Mr. Gerard Quinn. He was recently appointed just in October of 2020. The previous Rapporteur was Catalina de Vandas Aguiar. You may recall that in April of 2019, she was in New Brunswick as part of her visit to Canada. So these are some of the mechanisms that we can use to hold Canada and our provincial territorial governments accountable to the promise of the Convention. I'm going to use talking about the Special Rapporteur to segue into what the Convention means in New Brunswick and how we might be able to use it to advance inclusion and secure the rights of persons with disabilities. Because New Brunswick, you have a lot to be proud of. One of the reasons that the Special Rapporteur came to New Brunswick during her visit to Canada was to see your inclusive education system in action. In her report, she noted that inclusive education in New Brunswick is one of the best in the world and should be taken as a role model. You are global leaders, and while no one system is perfect, you need to safeguard and protect the progressive hold you have created in New Brunswick, especially around inclusive education. You also have an ambitious disability action plan and a commitment to a Provincial Accessibility Act. Here's where I think the Convention and the lessons learned in negotiating the Convention could be of value. Two key lessons we learned during negotiations was the power and importance of consultation and a broad take on nothing about us without us. When the disability community is meaningfully included and consulted, the results can be miraculous. The convention is the fastest negotiated convention in UN history. It has the highest number of signatories to a convention on the first day that it was opened for signature. And it's also the first convention where civil society was so actively involved in developing and negotiating the text. I think these things are intricately connected. Because of the level of engagement, the disability community felt a shared sense of ownership over the convention. We felt engaged. We understood where and why compromise was sometimes needed and worked together to find solutions that worked for all of us. Consultation also required the community to come together so that we could all find ways forward. I have often said that the success of the convention is that it's not written exactly the way I wanted it written, because it's also not written exactly the way countries wanted it written either. The second lesson was about thinking broadly about nothing about us without us, and that the convention gives us a platform to think and act inclusively. Minister Qualtrough echoed this in her comments at a COSP side event on Tuesday that was hosted by Canada. It's not sufficient to simply consult with persons with disabilities and their families on issues related to disability. Now is the time to be looking at the general measures, at our general efforts, and how are they inclusive of disability. It's not just nothing about us without us, but nothing without us. All programs, policies, need a disability lens, similar to a gender lens. So what does this mean in New Brunswick? Well, in New Brunswick, this may mean looking at how government and community can co-develop an implementation plan for your disability action plan. Or looking at how, for example, funding from the Federal National Housing Strategy is being used to promote the right to live and be included in the community as secured in Article 19 of the Convention. That would be participation. That would be nothing without us. So on the screen, I'm sharing some slides that are some challenges and criticisms that the Special Rapporteur identified in her report. I'm not going to go through these in details, and I will make my PowerPoint available following the presentation. But what she identified in her report is really consistent with some of the common criticisms that Canada receives. And in particular, it's around a lack of a robust national action plan on the convention. Now, the recent throne speech commitment to a Disability and Inclusion Action Plan is an important first step, and watching that develop is going to be a critical piece moving that forward. We also face a lot of criticism for our reservation on the convention on Article 12 related to legal capacity. And a common criticism is that we have poor coordination across sectors and with provinces and territories. What the convention gives is us an opportunity to think boldly and transformationally. It gives us a chance to think about what needs to be done to address systemic discrimination and entrenched issues facing people with disabilities and their families, like poverty, housing insecurity, income insecurity, the right to legal capacity, and others. We know that tinkering at the edges rarely brings about the change that is needed. Your disability action plan is an opportunity to take leadership, to be bold and transformational. An implementation plan of the action plan could use the convention as its foundation. The convention could be the lens to evaluate actions on the recommendations. Don't make bad systems better. Transform them into rights-based systems that honor and value autonomy and dignity and promote inclusion. Transforming to a rights-based approach would establish New Brunswick as a leading province in the country. Now is the time to challenge the status quo. You have the opportunity to build on progressive features you already have in place, like your transferable portable housing subsidy, to look at how housing supports can respect the right of people to choose where and with whom they live, and to access the necessary supports to control how they live, as guaranteed in Article 19 of the Convention. It's an opportunity to tackle long ignored issues like legal capacity. Use the Convention to guide the development of progressive, supported decision-making frameworks that respect the right of people to make decisions in their own lives and to use support as needed. Push the Government of Canada to provide leadership and to withdraw their reservation on Article 12. Use your commitment to an Accessibility Act to think beyond bricks and mortar or infrastructure. Use it to move from an accessibility focus to an inclusive approach, which will lead us to equality. Be bold and transformational. The theme of the International Day for Persons with Disabilities this year is Building Back Better toward a disability inclusive, accessible, and sustainable post-COVID-19 world. I would be remiss to speak today and not note the disproportionate impact COVID-19 has had on people with disabilities and their families. Again, the dangers of congregate care have been laid bare by the devastation experienced in care facilities across the country. We know that people are safest when they are in houses of their own and control of their lives. We saw restrictions that adversely impacted supports and services that made people vulnerable and isolated. We can do better, and we must do better. Disability inclusion must be part of all crisis response and recovery efforts. Hard-earned gains cannot be eroded because of financial challenges. As we build back, we need to ensure we're building back inclusively. Human rights are non-negotiable, no matter the financial climate, no matter the crisis. We cannot leave people with disabilities behind. I wish you all a very happy International Day of Persons with Disabilities, and I thank you for having me. I look forward to a chance when we can again do this in person. Thank you.